Theresa May just about survived an attempted coup over the weekend, but she could still be gone in a matter of days, and there are two men expected to potentially replace her. Ministers and backbenchers met at the Chequers estate over the weekend to discuss the future of Brexit with the Prime Minister, because it's obviously in a very tricky situation. Brexit's been delayed from March 29th to April 12th, presuming that May's deal gets through, and it doesn't really look like that deal will get through. It was a very, very tense meeting indeed, and the national press and the Sunday newspapers were all reporting that May's cabinet was in total revolt and attempting to force her out of government. Well, her post as Prime Minister anyway. The parliamentary party may no longer have any confidence in the PM at all, and it's widely believed that May has just a matter of days or maybe weeks left as Prime Minister. It was interesting watching the politicians arriving, by the way. Jacob Rees-Mogg turned up in his fancy car with his young son dressed in a suit, looking dapper as you'd expect. Then Ian Duncan Smith turned up in his weekend car wearing a baseball cap with the top down and his sunglasses on. And then Boris came along in his beat-up minivan, which is just so very Boris, isn't it? Now, Boris has been tipped as a future Tory party leader. He was going to run in the last election to replace David Cameron, but it was widely reported that Michael Gove stabbed him in the back, but that's a different story. But I'm not going to discuss Boris today because I actually don't think he's one of the two that's going to potentially replace May. Boris would have a majorly uphill battle to even get on the nomination papers, the ballot papers that would go out to the party members to vote, because first Boris would need enough people in the parliamentary party to support him in the first place, and it's a mostly Remain party in Westminster, so I very much doubt that Boris could ever end up on that ballot paper that goes out to members. But what could happen is that a caretaker Prime Minister could be installed to see us through this withdrawal stage of Brexit. So here's how it would work. First off, the Tory parliamentary party would need to come to a consensus on one candidate who should take over from the Prime Minister for a temporary period. Not a consensus over two candidates, because then it would have to go to the members to decide. A consensus around one candidate. And by coming to that consensus, it would essentially mean that one person's the only candidate, no election needed. And if they choose that one candidate, that person becomes Tory leader, and then they technically are accepted by the Queen and they become Prime Minister. Now, it wouldn't be expected for this new Prime Minister to stand again in the next elections, but they would see the party, the government, through this tricky withdrawal period during Brexit. There's simply no time for a general election at this point, because if there was a general election, Parliament would be dissolved over the time that we're meant to leave the EU, meaning we would leave without a deal, and the politicians don't want that to happen. So who could this caretaker Prime Minister be? Well, it's thought to be one of two people, David Lidington or Michael Gove. So who is David Lidington? You might never have heard of this guy, actually, but he's effectively the Deputy Prime Minister. It's not his official title, and he doesn't use the office of Deputy Prime Minister, which does exist, by the way. The last Deputy Prime Minister we had was Nick Clegg. But he is the Prime Minister's number two in the Cabinet Office, and he's been there for Theresa May through thick and thin throughout this entire horrible nightmare period since the reshuffle happened in January 2018. But he is a Remainer. He's as much a Remainer as Theresa May is, and I don't see how he could offer anything new at this point. Lidington might be able to steer the ship, but to where? The MP for Aylesbury is reported to have no enemies in the Commons, making him a good candidate, but his pro-Europe stance could mean that the Tories will end up being split even more. Brexiteers in the party will hate his stance on Brexit, and then the Wets in the party will hate the fact that he opposes same-sex marriage. An MP from the Remain side of the Tories told The Guardian, Lidington's reputation is so pro-EU, the Brexit hardcore in the ERG will eat him alive. So what about Michael Gove? Well, just like Lidington, Gove has denied that he's planning to take over the party. In fact, he even backed Theresa May recently after the weekend meeting, the attempted coup. But talk is talk, and the Tories are still going to need a new leader very, very soon. In fact, Tory sources are claiming that Gove could be Theresa May's silent assassin, which really does fit Gove's character. He was formerly the Secretary of State for Education. Now he's the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. He took over from Andrea Leadsom, who became the Commons leader. He's a Eurosceptic. He's on the right of the Tory party just about. He's fairly unoffensive. In fact, he's so robotic, I think he's probably the perfect man for the job. But Some suggest that it's been Gove all along and that actually Lidington's just been the fall guy for this. Some people think that Gove has been the guy wanting to become this caretaker PM and that Lidington's just been thrown in the firing line so we could take all the blows from the press. I'm not so sure. It's an interesting thought, but here's the thing. Gove has previously expressed interest in becoming Prime Minister, a party leader, leader of the Tories. Would he really want to become the guy that comes in to sweep up Theresa's mess? Or risk getting entangled in a Brexit that won't happen, and then have to become a caretaker Prime Minister that's there for a temporary period of time? Or would he rather be able to become a Prime Minister on his own accord, through his own election campaign, and serve much longer than a caretaker PM would? I'm not sure he could win that election. I think he's far, far too robotic. It's verging on creepy sometimes. Now, at this point, being Prime Minister has become that poison chalice that nobody wants to touch. But somebody's going to have to at some point, as May might even end up resigning just as a way of getting her deal through Parliament. It's all coming up very soon. Theresa May's going to have to make a decision, and it could be one of these two men. But all we know is that anyone who does become caretaker Prime Minister won't have very long as Prime Minister, and they'll have a very tough job ahead of them. If you like that and want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe and click the little bell button to make sure you never miss another Rebel video ever again.